Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode, whatever you want to call it, of Common Objections to Voluntarism. This is episode 3, I believe. We're going to keep going until we run out of questions. Today, I'm joined with some of the founding members of the Seeds of Liberty podcast, Jeremy and Danilo. Hey, guys.
Howdy. Hey.
The way we do this is I give you guys... someone can talk on it, the main point, and then someone can rebut or say anything, maybe add to the thing, and I'll chime in like a annoying person. So, first question on today's docket is, but what would people use for money? Gold is just inferior to paper money. Danilo, I know you're going to love this question, so I'm going to let you go first.
Well, I think when I look at currency, there's forced currency and then there's natural currency. I don't know if I read that somewhere or I came up with that my own conclusion, but natural currency would be what people voluntarily choose to use because as a society, people just choose to use certain things as they're available, due to their scarcity and portability and durability and fungibility and things like that. And that would include like spices and copper, gold, silver, lumber, exotic bird feathers, seashells, different things like that. So, and they come and go for various reasons, right? But then you have forced currency, which would be anything that's done by fiat, right? By governments, forced upon the population and given legal tender status and oftentimes monopoly status, in that anybody who attempts to compete with the forced currency or the fiat currency is immediately, reprimanded, subjected to punishment, and imprisoned most likely. So the only reason right now that we use fiat currency is because it's forced on the population, right? People would not willingly choose to use a currency that loses its purchasing power, progressively every single day that you hold it, right?
For sure.
And also that a small group of people control in a fascistic way. That just doesn't make sense. Why would you want to hold something that's just deteriorating in your hand? It doesn't make sense. But the only reason that people don't understand what gold is because it's been, well, first of all, it was outlawed in 1933. And then people, over time, you just get used to using paper currency, and then after a while it kind of fades away into oblivion, and people's like, what's gold? Gold is just for jewelry. Why would we want to use it? It's clunky, it's heavy. Why would you want to do that? It's just so easy to use paper, and people think, because it's like, it's backed by the U.S. government. That's what gives it value. That's what I get that a lot, and I say, no, that's not true. People make things of value, and people value them because they choose to use it, right? Like Bitcoin, like what is backed by Bitcoin? Absolutely nothing.
Cryptocurrency, right? That's it. Or its ability to be...
It's backed by nothing, really. Like no gold, no precious metals, no nothing. But its value is in the qualities it has of being a cryptocurrency, easy to be transported, to any, it's just easy to be accessed. Also very divisible, fungible, and all that kind of stuff. So it's really people's willingness to use something is what gives it value. Basically, I guess the subjective theory of value. So I can go on, but
yeah,
I give it to Jeremy.
what did Elon Musk say? He was like, just went through the Mexican border with 5.2 million, watching someone's $5,000 get seized. But the idea that fiat is somewhat better than gold, or any kind of paper currency that's issued on behalf of gold is better than the gold itself is kind of a ludicrous idea, in my opinion. But people have been trained and indoctrinated and propagandized to believe that, paper money is good. I guarantee you, if I had $100 million worth of paper money in a suitcase versus $100 million worth of gold, that person's going to take that paper money.
Yeah.
Because
exactly.
They see that as real wealth.
Exactly.
And you've got to break down that wall first before you can even consider talking to them about why paper money is just ridiculous, and every bit of bond or any kind of currency that is created by a government is just usually funded on the death of thousands and thousands of people through wars. Jeremy, anything to add to what Danilo said?
Sure. To address the what would we use in question in specifically the gold versus paper money is actually takes away from that question, because it's not necessarily that's saying like that's the only other option, but what would we use is we don't really know the answer to that. The whole idea of stuff like the three of us advocate for is that you allow for the free market of money to take over, and instead of having that monopoly that Danilo mentioned, where it's only that's because of the legal tender laws, that's the only thing that's readily exchanged and what people believe. Instead, you open it up to the possibility of things like Bitcoin, other cryptocurrencies, precious metals can be used more often, but anything, because as we discussed in our episode about money on the Seeds of Liberty podcast, the history is that so many different things have been used for currency and or money over the years, that when government isn't in the way and having that monopoly on it and forcing other options out of the market, the choice, the potential is unlimited.
Oh yeah, I mean anything could be currency. Yeah.
Well, exactly. So, but to like I said, to answer the question specifically, that's one of those things that a lot of statists will say is a cop out, but it's really not, because we don't actually really have to answer that question. What will we use? Well, again, what are we using now, and why is that the only thing? You make the choices unlimited, and the market will determine what becomes the most readily used, and even then you still most likely won't be tied to one. There still might be multiple ones that a good number of people, even here, like say on this one particular patch of dirt that most people refer to as the United States, there could be multiple ones that work alongside of each other, and that like I said, we don't actually have to answer that question, because that goes back to the who would pick the cotton thing.
That's a false dichotomy, right? That if the government doesn't issue the money, we're not going to have currency.
Exactly, it's a false dichotomy. It's not.
Okay.
It's not either or, and it'll be a matter of whatever the market shows that will work best. That's what it'll be. But because we don't have to pick it, we just have to know what's going on now is wrong, and people's real wealth is being stolen from them.
The answer to this question is, what will we use for money? What we'll use for money, whatever someone will take as money. That's plain and simple. That's the answer. Whatever people will accept as payment for a debt. So we're gonna move.
Before we go on, let me just give two observations. One, I just like to note what people's conception of gold and silver is. Like, if somebody were to mug someone, and then that person has $100 bill or 100-ounce silver bar, which one do you think they would take?
$100 bill.
Exactly. And the same thing in movies. Most Hollywood movies that feature a heist of a bank, are they most often stealing gold and silver, or are they most often stealing paper? I think that's an accurate.
Well, it's
reflection.
not even paper. The United States dollar is printed on cotton.
Yeah. Actually, it's worth less than paper, because before it was printed, it had a use, right? But now it's printed, it's worthless.
Yeah. So next question up is going straight to Jeremy. But who would protect our food? Who would ban GMOs, the evil scientists messing up our food, killing the bees? Who would do it, Jeremy?
Well, the answer to most of these questions, as I've said in a previous episode, is usually you ask yourself, well, who's doing it now? Right now, there is one entity. The FDA is supposed to be in charge of stuff like that. And with government, as we've seen with the fascistic nature, the Monsanto, who is currently the cream of the crop, as it were, in the GMO world, has legislation designed specifically for it to protect them from being
the Monsanto Protection Bill.
Yeah, that's the term for it. Yes.
If that's not the most clear-cut case of freaking fascism I've ever heard in my entire life.
Well, exactly.
Monsanto is too big to fail.
Yeah, that's what I was getting at. I've done research, but you know, there's still no way to tell really about GMOs. You know, but why do you need one entity to supposedly enforce rules about it? Because you know, a lot of the states are always trying to get, you know, labeling laws put in place, when instead you could allow the free market to handle that, because there are companies out there that have already voluntarily started, you know, marking their products non-GMO. Didn't take any special legislation for them to do that.
Everybody's going to be GMO haters until they make a weed that can't be traced by make a marijuana that can't be traced by a drug test. Then they're gonna be like, GMOs are the best.
Well, I'm sure for a lot of people that are supposedly anti, you know, with a lot of those movements, that a good portion of the people don't actually know why. They're just following whatever they hear in the rhetoric. So they may be easily swayed. Of course, if something comes along that you know benefits them, then they may easily change their mind. But I don't think that, again, just having the one entity. So who would do it? Again, you open up the market. If there's a demand for that, there will be, you know, you could have food inspectors. You could have, you know,
restaurants and grocery stores are going to want to have that. Hey, this institution that's got a 5-star rating inspects all of our food, and all the farmers are going to want that on their stuff too. Like, it's kind of crazy to think that Consumer Reports and the free market aren't going to destroy any kind of stuff that people. I mean, we've already seen what happens when someone tweets, "Hey, you know, Burger King, I found a Band-Aid in my Burger King." Oh, Burger King flips out, you know, and it's the end of the world and all that, and it's everyone knows about it the next day. So if somebody's making a GMO or they're doing some crazy stuff with our food without government protection, they're going to go out of business.
And on top of all that, banning is just never works in the first place. You know, that's just another way of saying prohibition, and that always backfires, because when a government bans something, you know, they enforce that with, you know, the initiation of aggression at all times with the enforcement agents, but it ends up protecting the companies, like in this case a Monsanto, or it protects the preferred interest. So any regulations that the people think are in their favor are actually benefiting the companies that they supposedly hate. So that's just a vicious cycle that goes on when government gets involved in trying to ban things. So there's no need to ban GMOs. If people would trust the science that they come across, and if it ends up panning out that they end up being horrible, then yes, I'm pretty positive that people will band together even in a free society and decide that it's not worth it for them, and they want to make sure they're gone. But it's a matter of choice, and if people want to believe they're good and they want to continue eating them, they should be allowed to. There's no reason that it should be banned, because that's another one of those things that on both sides you'll hear that it's settled science, but I think it seems to be far from settled, at least from my end. So, you know, the banning is just unnecessary. But
well, you have so many people with agendas hidden, you know, pushing their. So many people with agendas are pushing their, you know, their idea on the whole thing, and they're not looking at it rationally.
Well, that's the case with most problems with status, but yeah. So, like I said, basically, who would do it? There would be private agencies that could compete and provide these services, because, as you said, Dave, companies or food producers are going to want to make their customers happy. And how do you do that? In most cases, by providing as much information as possible so they can make informed decisions. So it is, as it always is, it's to their benefit to want these things and push to have these things. So it could very easily happen in a free society where the farmers and the store owners and the restaurants could be the ones leading the charge to have them implemented.
They've got to meet the market demand, you know.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
So I came into this topic initially before I actually started studying voluntarism, because I studied acupuncture, Chinese herbs, and Eastern nutrition. So I read a lot about this stuff about GMOs, about all the chemicals and herbicides and fungicides that they add. And I'm like, that's horrible. There needs to be laws. I was thinking that, and then later on, I learned more about the marketplace and economics and the nature of government and what banning actually does. And like you said, Jeremy, when you ban something, you are expanding state power, and you're decreasing, the freedom of the business owners to interact with the customer, right? By the threat of violence, right? And that never turns out well. And I always get people tell me, but look at Europe. They ban GMOs. Isn't that wonderful? We should ban them here too. But like you said, banning never solves anything. If people really want something, they're going to go to the black market and get it. There's either they go to the black market, or the effect that, like you said, all these regulations have is in stifling new competition at the expense of the entrenched special interest groups that have their political connections and the army of lobbyists and bribes that they can shower on the politicians. And actually I interviewed this guy Andrew Demeter from TeenTech recently, and he did an interesting recent video on. He interviewed the guy who I think started the first non-GMO restaurant in Ohio City, I think it was, and I thought that's a wonderful thing. Like you said, Jeremy, no law forced him to do that, right? He responded to market demand. There are people out there who want to eat non-GMO stuff, right? And he's catering to that demand, and that's wonderful. That's how things will work out. Is businesses will what people want, their desires, their needs, their wants. It's always shifting, right? And it's on the business owner to figure out, what do the people want? How can I satisfy them the best? And that's how you become wealthy. That's how you make a successful business, and that's how Steve Jobs made a successful business, right?
Well, that and state help, but yeah.
But yeah. But again, I mean, nobody, you can say, like, let's say like Walmart, right, receives all these tax breaks and subsidies, and let's say Steve Jobs received all these tax breaks and subsidies, but still nobody is forcing us to buy an iPad. Nobody's forcing us to shop at Walmart, right? Or even Chase or Bank of America, how fascistic they are. We're not really forced to go to Chase. We can. It would be more difficult to live off the grid, through Bitcoin or whatever, but we are not essentially forced to use it, right? It's a little bit different than saying the Federal Reserve, you can only use U.S. currency, anything else is outlawed, right? So it's not outlawed not to go to Chase or Walmart or, those other things, but yeah, so there is still a choice there.
Yeah, I mean, I look at it as a marketplace solution thing. I mean, look at Chiquita bananas, right? Chiquita bananas, the bananas that they make are GMO bananas. The banana that you buy on the shelf from Chiquita does not exist in nature. All right? Those actually can't even reproduce. They have to plant each one. It's not like there's a banana forest and they just keep doing it. Once that thing makes bananas, it dies off. As soon as if that tree gets cut down, you couldn't plant a Chiquita banana tree in the middle of the forest and then come back 10 years later and have 10,000 Chiquita banana trees around. There would just still be that one. It can't propagate itself. So obviously people are buying the shit out of bananas because they keep sending them here. So if people were like, no, this is a GMO, we don't want that, they would either have to adapt or die, and that's what we like. That's why people call us market Darwinist or whatever. Whatever the thing they try to say as an evil thing. It's like, why wouldn't you want the best to survive and let the dying die? If you're not doing with the market what people want, then why should you exist? Okay, we're going to move on to the next question, which is kind of a good one. How would criminals be dealt with? Danilo goes first on this.
How would criminals be dealt with? Well, I think the first thing to consider is what makes a criminal. And I think one of my favorite quotes is by Tacitus, is a Roman scholar. He said the more laws, the more corrupt the state, right? And also Lao Tzu, he says the more laws, the more criminals, right? So it's kind of an interesting thing is that, what makes a criminal in our current society of so many, thousands of pages of federal regulations and laws and taxes, there is actually no way to avoid breaking some insignificant law, right? There's a book, Harvey Silverglate. I have yet to read it, but I'm dying to read it. It's called 3 felonies a day. Like every American commits 3 felonies a day, for the very reason that there is such a monumental amount of laws on the books already, and there's more coming out each day, that it is impossible for people to not break the law. and it's kind of interesting that I talk about something simple like speed limits. How many people break the speed? The speed limit's 55 miles an hour on a regular highway. Does anybody drive less than 55 miles an hour on a highway? No. Yeah. So then what's the purpose of the law?
Well, actually, people do, especially here on Long Island. There's a lot of people who like to travel the left and sometimes the middle lane at 45. But yeah, on the whole, I would agree. Most people probably go over it.
The interstate beside my house, or that I get off on, there's like a 5-mile strip that 70 miles is the posted limit, and I've lived here my whole life. I've never seen a cop there, and everyone drives about 100 or 85, 90 miles an hour for that chunk of road, because no accidents ever happen there, I guess. So if there was accidents happening there, they'd put police officers there. So if you try driving the speed limit on the interstate, people are going to get pissed off at you, because there's construction right.
What's wrong with you?
There's construction right beside my house that's like 55 miles an hour. I've actually tried to drive 55 miles an hour, and like state troopers pass me, flicking me off. Like, what the fuck are you doing, bro? Like, speed, push the gas pedal. No. But what about the in my opinion, no victim, no crime. So, like, the people that steal, the people that kill, the people that assault, the people that do these things that we obviously don't want happening in any kind of modicum of society, how would they be dealt with? That's the question.
Okay. All right. So how? Okay. So let's say the basic crimes, like theft, assault, rape, murder, right? I mean, in talking about a free society, it's a little bit difficult because it's all speculation, and that's kind of, it gets all mangled up, and it's what people think would happen, and you can't no way to prove that and everything. But what I tell people is, right now, what we have is a system based on retribution or vengeance or revenge, right? It's like an eye for an eye, right? It's punishing the offender rather than making the victim whole, if you can make the victim whole, right? If you're talking about anything other than murder, you can more or less make the victim whole, days lost from work, money lost from not working, or emotional, damages, or medical expenses, or things like that, right? Inconveniencing. So there's ways to make the victim whole, but murder would be a little bit difficult. You would have to assign some kind of monetary amount to that, which kind of turns people's stomachs. Like, how can you assign a monetary value to a human life, right? But in some ways, that would be how the market would have to more or less compensate the victim's family, right? So in our society, it's retribution, and not only that, but the people that, let's say a murder, right? The people that survive, or the family of the murdered person, actually are punished in addition to that, because they're, with their money, they're providing the murderer with food, clothing, housing, shelter, security, right? Taking care of him for the rest of his life in what would be a socialist utopia known as prison, right? So that is
you get your free college education in prison. Duh.
Exactly. Full employment.
All these college kids. All these college kids that I say, I wish somebody would pay for my college. I'm like, dude, easy. Just go to the gas station, walk in there with a bat and start swinging it around. You might have to break a few eggs, and then you go to prison for assaulted robbery, or assault with a deadly weapon, and armed robbery. So then you're in there for 15 years. You could knock out 5 or 6 degrees, come out a smart man.
I mean, you may have to suffer some rape, but that's besides the point.
Hey, you might even be into that sort of thing. Who knows?
But you're still getting a benefit, so you can ignore that, just like they do with every other bad thing that they can ignore because of the benefits.
Yeah, you could go get three hots and a cot and study up, and when you get out, you could be a lawyer.
Exactly.
Yeah.
No, but like the best thing I think I've heard, I can't remember if it was David Freeman or not. I could be wrong on this, but he said, like, okay, you kill me, and my family takes you to arbitration, or they capture you. What's to stop them from killing you there immediately? Like, let's say there's an eyewitness and they caught you, and they kill you, right? You let someone know, hey, this guy killed my brother. I'm gonna kill him now, or because I don't think anyone has any qualms with that, because if there's a killer loose, they need to be dealt with, right? Like, I'm not saying that it needs to be the Wild West out there, but actions have repercussions. But let's say someone stole from you. They either owe you the property back with compensation, or let's say they worked somewhere. You could work out a thing with their employer. Look, this person's a thief. I want their next paycheck issued to me. They're not getting it. And then if not, that employer it's all about reputation. They're gainfully employing a thief. So people are going to boycott or not want to shop there. Like, hey, that guy's an asshole. He hires thieves and supports them. And indenturement is another thing. Indenturement for sure is another thing. Someone, there could be private prisons where those private prisons organize the prisoners to do work. Those prisoners get paid, but you get the money due to them owing you compensation for damages, property damages, or bodily harm, et cetera, et cetera. That, the private prison could take the contract out on that person. And if an arbitrator, a private arbitrator that both parties agree upon decides that that's just, then that person willingly entered that contract. So there's a million ways to skin a cat here, but you got to just follow common sense. Anything you'd like to add, Jeremy?
I feel the same way, like Danilo said, that it comes down to the whole retribution versus restitution thing, and the market will provide for that. This is usually attached to the notion that anarchy actually equals chaos, and that by saying you don't want the current police means you don't want any policing, and you want no rules and no laws. But that's just simply not the case, because again, people are going to want to be safe. People, just because even if the majority ended up believing that voluntary actions were the best way to go, and this becomes a reality, those people are still going to want to be kept safe to a certain extent, because with freedom does come responsibility, and you need to protect yourself and or your family, and anybody else you pull within your circle that you make some kind of contract or another with to provide for. You're going to want to make sure all those and your assets stay safe. So people aren't going to want real criminals that are actually committing actual acts of aggression against other people, rather than what we have now, where it's so many arbitrary edicts are based on victimless crimes, or the so-called victim is society, which is just ludicrous. Society
crimes against the state. Yeah.
Yeah, because that's what it is. They say society, and people believe the whole "we are the government" rhetoric, so they believe they're talking about them. No, but who is, when you see those court cases, who is the plaintiff? It's the state, the state, or the locality, whoever you're actually dealing with. That's the plaintiff in the action if they're taking action against you. Or even if you're taking action against somebody else, or you are the defendant, you are also it's also the state. So it's not society, it's the state that is trying to protect itself. So you take that out of the equation and you open it up to private security companies, who would in turn monitor for real crimes. And then it could go any number of ways, just like you said, Dave. I also think the whole indentured servitude thing actually makes sense too, because that's a way for them to pay off and try to make whole. Because Danilo, you said that earlier about making them whole. Even in certain cases, it's impossible. Even short of murder, it is impossible to make them whole. But you would try to make them as close as possible, so you don't end up paying for their
well, yeah, and also
for the
person
retribution
could
through
be
taxation.
but also the person could be a pacifist. Let's say someone's a complete pacifist, right? They would never do harm in any retribution or anything like that. And you walk up and shoot them in the head, and their family wants to sue you. But that person said, look, I never want anyone prosecuted on my behalf for anything they've ever done to me. So, like, that person could just get away for free in a free society. Now, a lot of society could say, I'm not associating with that guy because he's a murderer. And they could kick him out of their town, their city, whatnot. They could say, hey, you're just not welcome here. And if you come on this private property, you will be dealt with accordingly. So it's it's one of those things. What will you do about criminals? And I know we say that a lot, but it is an individual thing. Stop thinking that daddy's going to fix the issue. You've got to stand up and assert yourself sometimes. And if somebody's threatening your life, threats must be met with equal force, in my opinion. So if your neighbor's threatening to kill you, you really don't have many options other than to defend yourself or find a peaceful resolution in this situation. But I don't think any of us are anti-police. I think a lot of us are anti-law enforcement officers. And police and law enforcement officer are really not the same thing. Police used to be peace officers. They would patrol the areas, make sure no one's getting their ass beat, or someone's not getting killed, or someone's not getting raped or stolen from, and that they did protecting of property. But ever since they
we should mention the Viper company in Detroit that arose after Detroit basically collapsed and all the tax cows left, and but some people stayed, and they want, and also the police, there's no law enforcement officers at all, so there's still a demand for security, right? And then these people stepped in with their Viper company, providing private security to these businesses who pay for it, and with amazing results, and that's a beautiful example of the market responding to demand.
For sure. So let's move on to our next question. We're going to try to knock these out real quick because we've got the podcast coming up after this, and our guest is finally home. So next question is, how would poor people get an education? Now, I know we could talk about this for hours, but let's try to condense this down into the ludicrous notion that it is. Because an education, being taught something and teaching someone something and educating them are two different things. And, a lot of people don't realize that. We call them teacher. We shouldn't call them teacher. We should call them educators, because all they're doing is making sure that they're being taught what they're supposed to be and told to be taught. So I think Jeremy's first on this one, or Danilo, I can't remember.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, again, in this situation, what's being done now is atrocious, because the public schools that most poor, quote unquote poor children are forced into are a nightmare. So again, you talk about the hypothetical, because again, we don't necessarily have the answers, but you could see how this would go, and actually this is something that there is currently a real world example of to show. There's a book by James Tooley called The Beautiful Tree. And it talks about how he went to India I believe he was working for the World Bank, and he was doing research for them, and he was supposed to be doing research on the private schools in India. And he became disheartened knowing that India is, the major part of India is extremely poor. And he didn't think that he was helping at all. And then he ended up stumbling into the slums, and he came upon these extremely low-cost private schools that were hidden in the slums that not many people knew about, that were completely parent-funded, and the kids were flourishing in these, like he has this whole study on it, and it's amazing that these kids, because the parents, like, a lot of conservatives who are anti-public education, or the libertarians that are anti-publication, they talk about school choice and bringing it down to the local level. I dealt with that with the Common Core crowd, the anti-Common Core crowd, before I finally gave up on statism altogether. They were all about local, but this is literally taking it to the smallest possible local level. The parents are literally involved. They're the ones paying for it, and they have the vested interest in giving their children the best possible education, and they find ways to make it work. And these kids are doing amazing. And they're, some of them are starting to outpace the other, they'd outpace the public schools, they outpace the private schools, the higher end ones that Thule was originally sent to research. So that right there is a real world example of what can happen if government gets out of the way. That is the market providing. That is, we need to educate our kids. The government is not providing for us. We are literally going to take it into our own hands, and get teachers. And there's teachers that go there and teach for free. People from around the world are coming in and provide,
you mean
offering their
people
services.
aren't, you mean all people aren't evil and there's charitable people out there?
Yeah. So,
I don't believe it, man.
Yeah.
My Bible told me that everyone's evil.
Yeah, of course. Well,
I'm just saying, am I pastor too?
This is Dave the Bible Thumper's perspective.
Am I pastor too? Are you saying that two sources of information are wrong?
Dave's alter ego, Bible Thumper Dave.
Hell no.
So that is right there, like I said, a real world example of what could be done. And you actually mentioned the word charity. That's the other thing. Like, people forget that before government became the forced monopoly on so-called charities, because they even heavily regulate the supposed private ones, so they still have their hand in everything. Private charities provided a lot of services. They could just as easily do it for education if it came down to it, and because, as you pointed out, Dave, not everybody is evil. There are people that would willingly contribute. There's plenty of people that say they are happy to pay their school taxes even though they've never had kids in the school system. Those type of people exist. So in a free society, they would still exist, and they'd be more than happy to pay in a little bit, even if it's voluntary.
I don't know. I really need that gun to my head, man. I don't know.
So to me, this is another example of a false dichotomy, and the appeal to antiquity together, because false dichotomy in that if the state doesn't quote educate, but I wouldn't even call that education, because education to me seems a little more voluntary, whereas when you force kids to go into a particular institution for 12 years of the most impressionable years of their lives to learn useless, worthless information that after they leave those 12 years, they can barely hold down a minimum wage job. That to me sounds more like indoctrination than anything else.
Government-funded government-funded taxpayer farms is what they are.
Yeah. I mean, just imagine if you devote 12 years of your life to any discipline, how much of a master would you be at that particular discipline? 12 years, that's a massive amount of time. You'd be master at multiple disciplines if you had that amount of time. But so there's that. There's the appeal to antiquity that kids, for the memory of the recent generations, that there's always been public education, so that's the only way to educate kids. And if they don't go to public education, you must hate learning. You must hate mathematics, science, reading, writing. you must hate learning new things, right?
Yeah, think about the economic havoc it causes. And I know this is going to rustle some jimmies, but think about the economic havoc that it caused to, like, all the Midwestern farmers to take their kids, put them in public school for those amount of hours a day, instead of teaching them how to farm, what most likely they're going to do for their whole life, and be a better farmer, and putting them in farming schools, like, to be a better farmer. That might not be what every individual kid wants to do with their life, and they could express that to their parents, but a lot of people want to do what their father did or their mother did. And I know that to be true. And a lot of people don't want to do what their father and their mother did. They want to do something else with their life. So the free market would provide those opportunities, and confiscating your kids and dumping them in a prison-like environment with other people that they don't know, shouldn't know really, and force-feeding them propagandized indoctrination is not helping humanity at all, in my opinion.
Yeah, and before we go on to the next question, I want to say that what you said about the farmers, to me, that's the seen versus the unseen principle. Like, people tell me, look at you, you went to public school and you turned out okay. well, you have no idea how I would have turned out if I would have been able to follow and pursue the passions that I was actually interested in, and that would likely have led to me doing things we have no idea.
That argument is stupid, because like a lot of AIDS patients die, but some of them live 30 years, some of them live 5 years. I mean, just because there's an abnormality in the situation doesn't make the situation any better or worse.
Yeah, and just forcing people to do things is at the direct expense of them, voluntarily pursuing their passions, and you really have no idea what creations, what inventions that they would come up with that would, significantly increase the standard of living of humanity that you have just destroyed because you think they should know information that, a bunch of bureaucrats think it's necessary for everybody collectively to know. So
welfare parasites as well. The political class is a welfare class. So
oh yeah.
A lot of people don't know. All right, this is a big one, and I really just want to do like 3 minutes on this, because we could do a whole episode on this. Danilo's going first on this last one here. So, anarchy has never existed. Now, this question is so full of like what they think. Like, whenever someone says that they think they know the truth, but they don't. Like, it's one of those things where you can't really prove that anarchy has ever existed in a certain area. Like, most kingdoms were almost anarchistic in a sense, because the king couldn't afford to police and control the whole area. Like, everything you do in your everyday life that doesn't involve government is anarchy. So, your thoughts on this?
Yeah. I was going to say, mention that the very idea that, how much of our daily lives is governed by our own decisions, by ourselves, by our free will. What time you wake up in the morning, which job you want to work in, or what business you want to open, or what do you want to wear, or who do you want to date, all these things. There is no laws for that, and lo and behold, there's no chaos and there's no disorder and apocalypse that we can see. But whenever you implement, laws and regulations and taxes into people's lives that interferes with that free will, that's usually when you get all of that disorder. So when people say anarchy is chaos, I would rather say no. Statism is chaos. Anarchy is order, right? Anarchy is the spontaneous order that we all strive towards. Because why? And this goes back to the criminal idea of how would criminals be dealt with? Because chaos, or let's say violence and disorder, is expensive, right? It's not cheap to be violent, right? Maybe in our twisted, perverted fiat currency central banking world, it's cheap. So it seems to be cheap because the cost of the war and the death and the destruction has been passed on to future generations, right? It's at the expense of the productivity of the future generations, so that we can live today with all of this genocide, right? So it's very expensive to engage in violence, right? So that's why people always tend towards spontaneous order, like in certain you've seen those videos of in certain Asian countries where they remove the there's no what do you call that, traffic lights, right? You see these crazy intersections, right? People walking across these, and the car is stopping. It looks like an amazingly efficient organism. If you step back, it's like everything is working out perfectly. There's no accidents. It's just I love it. I love seeing things like that. Oh, surprise! We don't need stoplights and and stop signs and yield signs. And the funniest thing, I was driving today. The funniest thing got me thinking about this. I was driving, in those slow mall complexes where you're driving really slow because there's stores on either side and people crossing the street, right? And then you have the sign that says, cars must yield to passerby, people
Pedestrian.
pedestrians by law, by state law. Cars must yield. And I'm like, so what? If there was no law, people are just gonna run over? Like, whoops, sorry.
Whoops, not my problem.
It's like the reason that people aren't killing people, pedestrians, is because there's a state law sign that says that. I don't think so.
You must breathe air. It's the law.
It's the law. Yeah, I love that. So what would you say, Jeremy? What would you add to that?
Well, yeah, there have been examples. I mean, as you said, just the everyday life, people don't realize that. But, when people are looking for that a lot, they'll demand for, historical examples. And there actually are. If you go to Wikipedia and search historical examples of anarchy, there's a list of like a couple hundred, I think, or more over the centuries that had some component, or another. Although I usually find when I have this objection thrown at me, the first thing I say is, well, just because you can't point to one doesn't mean it doesn't, it can exist. It just hasn't been able to be formed because we've been dealing with, we have 5,000 plus years of recorded history, and there's been, a state in one form or the other through most of that time.
Well, yeah, lack of evidence doesn't disprove an assertion.
Yeah, you need more than that, exactly.
Is that the appeal to ignorance, right? Because
yes.
I can't conceive of it, it can't possibly exist.
Yeah. So there are examples, though, if people want to be pointed to that. Tom Woods does there's a great little video that he does with Gerard Casey about Ireland. I believe the title is Ireland stateless for 2,000 years. And there's examples in there of, little communities and little sections of people working together voluntarily and making things work. There's a history in Iceland of anarchic societies. There was one, what is it? I forget the name of it, but it was somewhere from like 900 to 1250 or somewhere in that neighborhood.
Are you talking about Ireland or
no,
China?
that Iceland.
Okay.
I was talking about Iceland. But Iceland has a history of it. There's more than that, but there was one that was, 300 years. And there's a lot of things I've read on it that have all said the reason that it actually ended up failing is because it wasn't anarchic enough. They ended up implementing too many rules and laws, and certain people started getting into power, and that's why it ended up collapsing. And also to even push back a little, something that Dave, you actually said on a couple of questions ago about the Wild West. That's actually a misconception. That people have been fed through their indoctrination, which also ties back into the last question about schooling.
More people die in Chicago in like a month than I think is recorded in the Wild West. Yeah.
The so-called Wild West actually was not that wild, and it was a lot more of a voluntary society until the federal government finally pushed its way out there and started implementing its policies and went to war against the Indians. Before that, people were getting along just fine. They understood and learned how to protect each other's property rights and respect each other's property rights. And they functioned, they had their own private sheriffs in a lot of cases, but people respected each other because most people were armed. And that is actually where that adage, an armed polite society is a polite society comes from, because it was proven out there. But since then, that's been swept under the rug, and the Hollywood image of the Wild West and all the gunslingers is all people know about, and they don't realize that in the timeline before government got out there and messed it up with sticking its hands in everything, and starting wars and slaughtering hundreds and hundreds of Indians, and driving them off the land that they had first. Talk about respecting property rights. But that's when things went badly. So even there you have an example of it. So there are examples of it. But what I usually say to that when that objection is presented to me is that it's really even looking at those is kind of an apples and to orange comparison, because since then, since all these attempts, you know, even you look at what is it, Catalonia in Spain, in the early 19th century, right? Was that what it was? The early 20th century. You know, it lasted for a short time, but these things have existed. But even the most recent ones are no comparison to what could occur in a society like ours already is, with the technological advancements and the advancements in human consciousness, you know, since these were tried before. It's a whole new ball game, you know, with the rapid transfer of information, and people being able to learn so much more quickly if they choose to. You know, the possibilities are endless. So
yeah,
to
for
even,
sure.
So to even compare it to these historical examples, because, you know, when you bring these to people's attentions who have this objection, all they'll try to do is poke holes in those societies, and it's like, okay, yeah, it wasn't perfected, but a lot of them will also try to use the same argument that that they believe in the Constitution because it was the best thing created, even though it wasn't necessarily perfected. Okay.
I ask them which constitution are you referring to? The North the North Korean Constitution, the Russian Constitution, the Chinese Constitution. Which one are you talking about here?
Yeah.
But
Exactly.
let's wrap this up. My normal response to when someone says, anarchy has never existed, I say, show me one example of limited government existing. Show me one example of communism existing. Show me one example of true fascism existing. Spoiler alert, they can't. They won't. But true voluntary society has never been tried without the silly belief in authority. And that's not going to happen if people still believe that there needs to be an authority in their life driving their actions, whether or not it's a light-handed authority or a heavy-handed authority. But we really appreciate you guys listening to this.
Let me just wrap up with a quote by Charles Bukowski. You just reminded me. He said, if a law is acceptable, I'll tolerate it, and if a law is unacceptable, I break it.
He also said,
paraphrasing, we can find that, but
he also said every answer can be found at the bottom of a bottle. Bukowski was a crazy mofo. But yeah, we really appreciate you listening to this. Thank you for the quote, Danilo. Thank you for joining us, Jeremy. If you have any more questions you want us to answer, put it in the comments below. Really appreciate you keeping up with this and putting comments on our videos or Facebook or wherever this is posted. You can check out all of our other content at theseedsofliberty.com. And thank you for watching. Bye.
Take care.
Peace.